She threw the letter into the fire, not slowly, not with hesitation. Katerina Novak crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, pulled open the iron door of the stove, and fed her sister's words to the flames without flinching. Her hands were steady. Her jaw was set. But her eyes told the truth. Her hands refused to. When Ethan stepped through the back door and saw her standing at that stove watching paper turn to ash, he didn't ask what she'd burned. He asked only one question. "Are you staying?" Katerina didn't answer. She closed the stove door and walked past him into the dark. If this story moves you, please subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very last word, because this one doesn't end the way you expect. Drop the name of your city in the comments below so I can see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all began. Red Creek, Montana. Summer 1884. The job notice went up on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, half the town had read it. By Thursday, people were already talking about it in ways that had nothing to do with housekeeping. Margaret Dawson had written it herself, standing at the counter of her dry goods store with a stub of pencil and the particular determination of a woman who has decided she knows better than everyone else in the room, including the man she's trying to help. She'd handed the finished notice to Ethan Calloway and told him to put it in the window of the post office. He'd taken it without argument. Not because he agreed with her, not because he wanted help, because arguing with Margaret Dawson cost more energy than he had left most days. And the truth was, he hadn't eaten a proper meal in 11 days, and the stack of unread mail on his desk had grown tall enough to fall over twice in the same week. Ethan Calloway was 39 years old and looked like a man who had spent the last 4 years fighting a war no one else could see. He was still tall, still broad-shouldered, still wore the badge the way a man wears something he believes in rather than something he was handed. People in Red Creek respected him absolutely and understood him not at all. His wife Eleanor had died 4 years ago in October. Fever. Fast and brutal and without warning, the way the worst things always are. They had been married 11 years. Ethan had stood at her grave in the cold Montana wind and felt something go out of him like a lamp being turned down to nothing, and he had simply never turned it back up. He didn't drink. He didn't rage. He didn't make dramatic gestures of grief that people could point to and name. He just kept working, kept doing the job, kept being exactly what Red Creek needed him to be, which was a steady man with a badge and a calm voice and the ability to walk into trouble without flinching. He came home every evening to a house that was quieter than a house should be. He made whatever he could find in the kitchen. He slept. He rose before dawn and went back to work. He had been doing this for 4 years, and he had convinced himself in the particular way that lonely people convince themselves of things, that this was simply how his life was now, and that he had made his peace with it. Margaret knew better. She'd known Eleanor. She watched Ethan the way a neighbor watches a house they're worried might catch fire, not constantly, not with alarm, but with the steady, patient attention of someone who knows what smoke looks like before the flames appear. She'd watched him lose weight he couldn't afford to lose, watched him forget things, watched him stop showing up to the church socials, then stop attending the town meetings unless duty required it, then stop returning books to the lending library because he hadn't opened them since they'd been borrowed. So she wrote the notice, and she made him post it, and then she waited. 12 people read it, 4 inquired, 3 declined when they learned it was the sheriff's household, and understood what the town would say about a woman living under that roof, even in a purely professional capacity. 1 woman showed up, looked at the state of the house, and left without speaking a word. Only 1 letter arrived from outside Red Creek. Ethan read it on a Friday evening at his desk in the sheriff's office, while the last of the summer light came through the window and turned the dust on his paperwork the color of old gold. The letter was written in careful, deliberate English, each word placed with the particular precision of someone who has learned the language through discipline rather than childhood. My name is Katerina Novak. I am 34 years of age. I am originally from Poland and have been living in America for 9 years. I am experienced in household management, food preparation, laundry mending, and general farm and property maintenance. I am honest, I am reliable, and I do not require anything except fair wages and a clean place to sleep. I understand you are seeking summer help only. That arrangement suits me. I do not stay where I am not needed." He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked out the window at the empty street. He didn't know what he'd expected. Something he supposed. Some reason not to answer. The letter gave him none. He picked it up a third time and read the last line again. "I do not stay where I am not needed." He wrote back the same evening. 2 sentences. The job was hers if she wanted it. She could arrive on the first Monday of June. She arrived on a Sunday instead. He was still in his office when she knocked on the door. It was late afternoon, and the town was quiet, the way small towns go quiet on Sundays. That particular heavy stillness that settles over Main Street like a held breath. He opened the door and found a woman standing on his step with a single brown suitcase at her feet, and a look on her face that he would later try to describe to Margaret and fail, because it was not one thing. It was not nervousness, and it was not boldness, and it was not the careful blankness that strangers sometimes wear when they are trying not to be read. It was simply the face of a person who has learned to stand wherever she is without apologizing for the space she takes up. "You are Sheriff Calloway," she said. It was not a question. "I am," he said. "I am Katerina Novak." She picked up her suitcase without waiting to be invited. "I came a day early. I hope that is not a difficulty." He stepped back from the door. "It's not." She walked in and looked around his office with the quiet assessing gaze of a woman calculating what needs to be done. She looked at the stacked files, the cold coffee sitting on the edge of his desk, the broken hinge on the window shutter that he'd been meaning to fix for 6 months. She did not comment on any of it. She simply looked and noted and adjusted whatever internal inventory she was keeping. "Where is the house?" she asked. "I'll take you over. I can find it. I only need the direction." He told her. She nodded, picked up her suitcase again, and walked out into the Sunday afternoon without another word. He stood in the doorway watching her cross the street and turned one thought over in his mind, like a stone he wasn't sure what to do with. She walked like a woman who had been carrying her own weight for so long that it no longer occurred to her to put it down. By the time he got home that evening, she had already found the broom. He walked through this front door and stopped. The floor near the entrance had been swept. The stack of old newspapers that had been accumulating near the window since February was gone. The air smelled different, not perfumed, not flowery, just cleaner. Like something that had been closed up too long had finally been opened. Katerina came through from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a cloth she'd found somewhere. "There is no food in this house," she said without greeting and without accusation, purely as information. "I know," he said. "The store is closed today." "I know. I found flour and lard and a tin of salt pork that is still good. I made biscuits. They are not fancy, but they are hot." She looked at him evenly. "Do you want to eat?" He sat down at his own kitchen table and ate 3 biscuits with salt pork and black coffee, while Katerina sat across from him and did not make conversation or attempt to fill the silence with noise. She simply sat and drank her own coffee and let the evening settle around them the way evenings do when no one is fighting them. It was the first meal he'd eaten at that table in over a year. He didn't tell her that. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because it seemed like information that would embarrass him. Maybe because saying it out loud would require him to understand it himself, and he wasn't ready for that. The next morning she was already in the kitchen when he came down before sunrise. She didn't comment on the hour. She handed him coffee and went back to what she was doing, which appeared to be making a list of everything wrong with the kitchen based on some internal standard of order that he suspected was considerably higher than anything he had managed. "The back door hangs wrong," she said without looking up. "It does not close properly. There is a gap in the winter, you lose heat. I can fix it if you have a hammer and the right nails." "I have tools in the barn." "Good. After breakfast." She fixed the door herself. He watched her from a distance, telling himself he was checking on things, knowing that wasn't entirely true. She worked with a focused economy of motion, no wasted effort, no performing the work for an audience. She simply did it until it was done. Margaret Dawson came by that afternoon officially to drop off a pan of cornbread she'd made too much of, actually to get a look at the woman everyone in town was already discussing. Katerina opened the door before Margaret could knock. Margaret blinked. "Well, you must be the housekeeper." "I am Katerina Novak," Katerina said. "You must be Mrs. Dawson. The sheriff mentioned you. Please come in." Margaret came in, looked around the kitchen, looked at Katerina, looked at the clean floor, and the repaired door, and the small jar of wildflowers sitting on the windowsill. Where had she found wildflowers, and sat down at the table with the expression of a woman who is recalculating something. "You came all the way from Chicago most recently," Katerina said. She was already setting out cups. "Before that Cincinnati, before that Pittsburgh. I have been in America 9 years. She said it without resentment and without pride, just fact the way you state a distance or a temperature. "That's a lot of moving," Margaret said carefully. "Yes," Katerina agreed. "It is." She poured the coffee and sat down across from Margaret and looked at her directly. "You want to know if I am trustworthy?" Margaret had the grace to look only slightly startled. "I want to know if you're settled." "I am settled in my character," Katerina said. "Whether I am settled in one place is a different question. It has not often been up to me." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "But I work hard. I do not steal. I do not lie. And I do not make trouble for the people who employ me." She looked at Margaret steadily. "Is there something else you need to know?" Margaret studied her for a long moment. Then she laughed a short, genuine sound. "Ethan didn't warn me about you." "He does not seem like a man who talks much." "He doesn't. He used to." Margaret's voice softened slightly. "He used to be different." Katerina said nothing. She lifted her cup and waited the way a woman who has learned that other people's grief requires space will always wait. Margaret set down her pan of cornbread and stood up. "Well, if you need anything from the store, you put it on his account." She paused at the door. "The town's going to talk, you know." "I know," Katerina said. "It doesn't bother you." Katerina considered this honestly. "It has never yet been the town talking that drove me away from somewhere. It has always been something else." She picked up the cornbread and carried it to the counter. "Thank you for this, Mrs. Dawson." Margaret left. Katerina stood at the kitchen window and watched her go, and whatever she was thinking stayed exactly where it was behind her eyes, behind the careful, steady face she'd learned to wear in a country that did not always make room for the feelings of people who had arrived from somewhere else. Word got around Red Creek the way word always gets around in small towns, which is to say instantly and with embellishment. By the end of the first week, there were at least 3 separate theories circulating about why a foreign woman was living under the sheriff's roof. Some were charitable. Most were not. Hetty Graves, who ran the millinery shop and had the particular talent of making concern sound identical to gossip, told anyone who would listen that she had nothing against immigrants in general. But it did seem unusual. Thomas Birch, who owned the feed store and had unsuccessfully courted a widow on the other side of town for 2 years, said he didn't see why a man of Ethan's standing needed to go outside Red Creek for a housekeeper, when there were perfectly good local women who could do the job. He said this to 3 separate people before someone pointed out that none of those local women had actually applied for the position, and he went quiet after that. Katerina heard some of it and ignored all of it. She had grown a working knowledge of how small towns treated people who looked different or spoke with an accent, and she had long since decided that the only armor worth wearing was the kind built from behavior rather than argument. You could not convince people with words. You could only outwork their doubts until there was nothing left to say. She outworked them consistently and without drama. She repaired the broken screen on the back porch. She organized years' worth of the sheriff's paperwork into a system he could actually find things in, which turned out to matter enormously when he spent 40 minutes one Thursday morning looking for a property deed that Katerina located in under 3 minutes. She planted a kitchen garden behind the house, tomatoes, green beans, squash herbs, and began bringing fresh vegetables to Margaret's store once a week, which Margaret sold and split the earnings with her without being asked. The first time Ethan came home to find dinner waiting on the table, he stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment longer than necessary. Katerina was at the stove, her back to him, stirring something that smelled like a memory he hadn't expected. "Sit down," she said without turning. "It is almost ready." He sat. He looked at the table. It had been set properly. Plates, forks, a folded cloth that was probably one of the napkins he hadn't known he owned. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know I did not have to." She turned and set a pot on the table and sat down across from him. "I made chicken stew. There was a hen in the yard that had stopped laying. I got permission from your neighbor." He stared at her. "You asked Bill Hawthorne for his chicken." "I asked his wife. She was very agreeable." Katerina served them both and picked up her fork. "Eat before it gets cold." He ate. It was the best thing he'd tasted in 4 years, and he thought about saying so and then didn't because he was Ethan Calloway and he had spent 4 years training himself not to want things and admitting that the warm kitchen, the set table, the woman sitting across from him eating chicken stew and not requiring him to perform or explain or be any particular version of himself. That admitting this was exactly what he had been missing, felt dangerous in a way he did not entirely understand. So instead he said, "I'll get you more flour from the store tomorrow." "Thank you," Katerina said. "And the screen on the front window is also loose. I will fix it this week if you get me the right size nails." "I'll get them." They finished dinner in the kind of silence that is not empty. The kind that two people can sit inside without either of them needing to fill it. Ethan did the dishes. Katerina had been doing them all week, and he'd been watching her do them all week, and he was not a man who left work to someone else when he was standing right there, and besides, it was something to do with his hands, something that didn't require him to think about the way the kitchen had felt when it was just him in it. She went out to check on the garden before dark. He could see her from the window moving between the rows of seedlings she'd put in, doing something with her hands in the earth. The evening light was coming down gold through the cottonwood trees. He watched her for a moment he wasn't entitled to watch, and then turned away from the window and finished the dishes. The following Saturday, a man named Gerald Holt rode into Red Creek. He was a cattle buyer from over near Billings, broad through the chest, and loud in the way that men who are accustomed to being heard are loud not because they need to be, but because they've simply never had to learn restraint. He came into the sheriff's office on a small matter involving a disputed bill of sale, and Ethan was in the middle of going through it with him when Katerina appeared at the door with a folder of papers he'd asked her to find that morning. She knocked. Ethan looked up. "Come in." She entered, handed him the folder, and turned to go. Gerald Holt looked at her the way some men look at women they consider to be of no particular importance, which is to say with the casual assessment of someone evaluating livestock. "Who's this Miss Novak?" Ethan said without inflection. "She works here." "Foreign, is she?" Holt said, still looking at her. "What kind of foreign?" Katerina stopped at the door. She turned back, and her face was completely composed. "Polish," she said clearly. "Is there something you require?" Holt grinned. "Just curious. Didn't know the sheriff had help. What kind of help does she provide exactly?" The room went very still. Ethan set down the papers. He did it slowly, deliberately, the way a man sets something down when he wants his hands free. He stood up from behind his desk. He was a tall man, and when he stood in that office with that particular quality of stillness in him, the room understood that something had just changed. "I'm going to ask you to take that question back, Mr. Holt," he said. Holt's grin faded slightly. "I didn't mean anything by it." "Yes, you did," Ethan said. "And you're going to take it back or you're going to take your business elsewhere. Miss Novak is a woman of integrity who works in my household. If you have something respectful to say in her direction, say it. Otherwise, you're done here." Holt looked at Katerina. He looked at Ethan. He cleared his throat. "I apologize, miss," he said with all the genuine feeling of a man who is apologizing because the alternative has become inconvenient. That was rude. Katerina looked at him for one moment. "Thank you," she said evenly, and she left. After Holt concluded his business and departed, Ethan walked through the back of the office and found Katerina in the small room behind the kitchen, folding laundry, with the particular focused attention she brought to everything. "You didn't need to do that," she said without looking up. "Yes, I did," he said. She folded a shirt with precise, practiced movements. "I have heard worse than that. I have managed worse than that." "I know you have." He leaned in the doorway. "Doesn't mean it was acceptable." She looked up then. Her eyes were dark and direct, and they held the complicated thing that they had been holding since she arrived in Red Creek, which was the expression of a woman who is not accustomed to being defended by anyone and does not entirely know what to do with it when it happens. "I fight my own battles," she said. "I know that too." He held her gaze. "But you don't always have to." She looked back down at the laundry. "Thank you, Sheriff." He went back to his office. He sat at his desk and looked out the window at the summer street and tried to figure out what had shifted in the room during that moment and whether it was something he ought to be concerned about, and found to his own considerable surprise that he was not concerned at all. That was the most alarming thing of any. Not that it had happened, but that it didn't frighten him. That evening, for the first time in 4 years, Ethan Calloway came home before dark. He didn't have a reason. The office was fine. There was nothing that couldn't wait. He just found himself walking the long way around the block toward the house instead of away from it, and pushing open the front door before the sun had finished setting. Katerina was on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one without comment. They sat side by side in the old porch chairs and watched the light go down behind the hills and the sky turn the particular shade of bruised blue that Montana evenings do before they settle into dark. "What made you answer the notice?" he asked. She thought about it. "The last line," she said. It said, "Summer help only. No promises. No expectations." She turned the cup in her hands. "I understood that." He nodded. The crickets started up somewhere in the grass. "And now?" he asked. "Is that still what you want?" "No promises." Katerina was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was careful the way it always was. But underneath the care, there was something else. Something she was not quite ready to name, but had not quite managed to put back where she kept it. "I don't know what I want," she said honestly. "I only know that this—" She paused. "This is the first place in a long time where I have not woken up counting the days until I leave." The porch was quiet. The hills were going dark. Somewhere down the street, a door opened and closed. Ethan Calloway sat with the coffee going warm in his hands and the evening coming down around them both, and the most dangerous thing happened. Not a declaration, not a gesture. Nothing that could be pointed to or named. He simply stopped waiting for things to go back to how they were before she came. And underneath the quiet of that ordinary evening, everything changed. The garden was the first thing people noticed, not because it was remarkable exactly, but because it hadn't been there before. 3 weeks after Katerina Novak arrived in Red Creek, the patch of bare dirt behind Ethan's house had become something deliberate. Tomato plants staked and tied. Green beans climbing a length of rough twine she'd strung between 2 fence posts. Squash spreading low and wide in the corner. Herbs she'd grown from seed in tin cans on the kitchen windowsill, then moved outside when they were ready. Margaret Dawson saw it on a Wednesday morning when she came by with a basket of eggs and stood at the back fence looking at it for a long time, without saying anything. "You put this in yourself?" she finally asked. "Yes," Katerina said. She was on her knees in the dirt doing something with the bean rows. "When did you find the time?" "Before dawn, after supper. When there is work to be done, you find the time." She sat back on her heels and looked at the plants the way a person looks at something they are genuinely proud of and have perhaps learned to keep that pride quiet. "In Poland, my mother had a garden. I used to think it was just food. Now I understand it was also something else." "What?" Margaret asked. Katerina thought about it. "Evidence," she said, "that you intend to still be here when it is time to harvest." Margaret carried that sentence back to her store and turned it over in her mind for the rest of the day. Inside the house, the change was less visible but deeper. It was the kind of change that happens in increments small enough that you don't notice them until one morning you look up and everything is different. The desk in Ethan's office at home, which had been a landscape of disorder for 4 years, now had a system. The winter coats that had been hanging by the door since spring had been cleaned and stored. There was always coffee when he woke up, and always something worth eating when he came home, and always in some corner of whatever room he was in, the quiet evidence of someone who was taking care of things he hadn't had the energy to take care of himself. He didn't thank her enough for it. He knew that. He was not a man who found gratitude easy to express when the thing he was grateful for was too large to fit inside ordinary words. So he did other things. He got up early on a Tuesday and fixed the hinge on the barn door she'd mentioned in passing 6 days ago. He brought the right size nails from the store without being asked again. He noticed when she was tired and made the coffee himself on those evenings, without comment. She noticed. She didn't say so, but she noticed. The town kept talking. It had not, as Katerina had understood, it would not stop talking simply because there was nothing to talk about. If anything, the absence of genuine scandal made the speculation more creative. Hetty Graves had graduated from vague concern to specific theories. She told the Women's Sewing Circle on a Thursday afternoon that she didn't doubt the woman's character exactly, but it did seem to her that a foreign woman who had moved from city to city for 9 years without settling anywhere must have some reason for that kind of restlessness. And wasn't it convenient that the reason she'd finally stopped moving was in the home of the most eligible widower in Garfield County? One of the women in the sewing circle, a rancher's wife named June Aldridge, looked up from her needlework and said, "Hetty, she fixed the man's door and planted him vegetables. What exactly do you think she's after?" There was a silence. "I'm just saying," Hetty said with less confidence than she'd started with. "Well, stop saying," June told her and went back to her needlework. June Aldridge showed up at Ethan's back door 2 days later with a bolt of cloth she claimed she had too much of. She and Katerina stood in the kitchen for 40 minutes talking about seeds and soil composition and the particular stubbornness of Montana clay. And by the time June left, something had been established between them that was quieter and more durable than friendship, and would become exactly that over the course of the coming weeks. It was June who first warned her. They were in the kitchen garden on a Saturday morning in late June, and June was showing Katerina a trick with squash vines that she'd learned from her grandmother when she said without particular preamble, "You know about the Halbrook claim?" Katerina looked at her. "No. Family south of town. Been here 20 years. Good people. The railroad company has been sending men to look at their land for 2 months." June kept her eyes on the plants. "The deeds are complicated, they say. Some question about the original filing. Meanwhile, the Halbrooks keep getting notices they can't fully understand because the language is legal and they're farmers, not lawyers." "What has the sheriff done?" Katerina asked. "He's been to see them twice. Told them to hold their ground, and he's looking into it." June sat back and looked at her directly. "What I'm telling you is that when Ethan Calloway goes quiet and starts staying late at the office, it's usually because something is pulling at him that he can't solve with a badge alone." She paused. "He doesn't talk about what's bothering him. You probably know that." "I have noticed," Katerina said. "If he does talk," June said, "even sideways, even about something else, it matters to him that someone is listening." She picked up her basket. "I thought you should know." Katerina turned back to the garden and stayed there for a long time after June left. She thought about what it means to listen to a person who has forgotten he is allowed to speak. That evening, Ethan came home later than usual. He came in through the back door and sat down at the kitchen table without taking his hat off, which meant he wasn't fully there yet, which meant something from the office had followed him home and was still sitting on his shoulders. Katerina put a plate in front of him and sat down across from him with her own and said, "Tell me about the Halbrook family." He looked up. Something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe? Or the complicated expression of a man who is not used to being asked directly about the thing that is actually troubling him. "June told you." "A little. Tell me the rest." He took off his hat and set it on the table. and then with the slow, careful manner of a man who has been holding something for a long time and is not entirely sure how to set it down without it breaking, he told her. The Hallbrook land. The railroad company's agent, a man named Caswell, who had been coming around with documents that looked official and spoke in the particular smooth language of men who have been trained to make illegal things sound like procedure. The original deed filed 20 years ago in a territorial court that no longer existed in the same form. The question of whether the filing was valid under new state law, a question that Caswell kept raising and then smiling about the smile of a man who already knows how the answer is going to fall. They've been there 20 years, Ethan said. Tom Hallbrook broke that ground himself. His children were born on that land. And the law? Katerina asked. The law is being used against them, he said flatly, by someone who understands it better than they do. That's not justice. That's just money knowing how to read. Katerina was quiet for a moment. Is there a lawyer in Red Creek? One. He's old and he's afraid of Caswell's employer. What about Billings Helena? There must be someone. Ethan looked at her with the expression of a man who has thought about this and hit walls. I sent 2 letters last week. I'm waiting. Then you wait, she said. But you don't stop looking, and you don't let Caswell think the land is already his. She met his eyes. Is there anything I can do? He looked at her for a moment. It was a real question. She wasn't performing helpfulness. She was genuinely asking. You know anything about land documents? He said. In Poland, my father spent 3 years fighting to keep a piece of land that belonged to us. He lost. Her voice was even. But I know what the documents should look like, and I know what it looks like when someone has changed something they shouldn't have changed. She held his gaze. Show me what you have. He brought the papers after dinner. They spread them on the kitchen table, and Katerina went through them with the focused, methodical attention she brought to everything, and Ethan watched her work and thought not for the first time that there was something underneath this woman's surface that most people would never take the time to find out was there. She found it in 40 minutes. A discrepancy in the survey notation between the original deed and the copy Caswell had submitted to the county recorder. Not dramatic, not obvious. Small enough to be accidental, but in the exact location that would, if valid, shift the eastern boundary of the Hallbrook property by 60 feet, that happened to contain the only viable route for the railroad spur line. Katerina put her finger on the relevant line and looked at Ethan. This, she said. He leaned in. He read it. He read it again. And she watched his face go through something she recognized, the particular passage from frustration to clarity that happens when a problem that has been shapeless suddenly gets an edge. That's it, he said quietly. It is not an accident, she said. No, he agreed. It is not. He straightened up and looked at her. How did you— My father's documents, she said simply. I memorized them, hoping they would save us. She took her hand off the papers. They did not, but the knowledge remained. He looked at her for a moment with something she wasn't quite prepared for in his face. Not pity, not admiration exactly, something quieter. The look of a man who is understanding for the first time that the person in front of him has a history that goes down deep and that the history has cost her things, and that she has kept going anyway. I'm sorry, he said, about your father's land. It was a long time ago, she said. That doesn't make it smaller. She looked down at the papers. No, she said after a moment. It does not. The storm came the following week. Not a gentle summer rain, a proper Montana storm, the kind that comes down from the north fast and mean and without much warning, full of lightning, and the kind of wind that makes buildings complain. It hit on a Tuesday afternoon when Ethan was out on the south side of town dealing with a dispute between 2 ranchers that had been building for a month, and Katerina was alone at the house. The barn roof had a section that she'd been watching with concern since she arrived, a section of boards that had been repaired badly at some point and sat wrong against the frame. She'd mentioned it to Ethan twice. He'd said he'd get to it. He hadn't gotten to it because Ethan Calloway had a way of deprioritizing anything related to his own property, a habit of a man who had stopped investing in his own life. When the storm hit and the wind came up, that section of roof began to go. She heard it from this kitchen. A deep groaning sound, then a sharp crack, then the particular hard drumming of rain coming in somewhere it shouldn't. She didn't hesitate. She went to the barn. The next hour was not elegant. It was wet and it was loud, and it involved her on a ladder in a Montana thunderstorm with a hammer and a length of tarpaulin she found in the back corner of the barn, and 3 different attempts to get it secured before the wind took it again. She came off the ladder twice, both times catching herself, both times going back up. Her skirt was soaked through inside 4 minutes. She didn't stop. By the time Ethan came back, she was down from the ladder and standing in the barn doorway, with water running off her hair and the tarpaulin pinned down over the worst of the damaged section. He pulled up short when he saw her. He looked at the roof. He looked at her. He looked at the hammer still in her hand. "You went up there," he said. "In that storm." "The water was coming in on your saddle," she said. "And on those boxes in the corner. I did not know what was in them." "Eleanor's things," he said very quietly. She looked at him. She had not known that. "I thought they might be important," she said. He stood in the barn doorway in the rain, looking at her with an expression she had not yet seen on his face. It was not complicated exactly. It was the face of a man whose chest has just been pressed from the inside by something he was not prepared for. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." "You came off the ladder." She blinked. "You weren't here. I can see the mud on your shoulder, Katerina." It was the first time he'd used her given name. Not Miss Novak, not her. Katerina. He said it the way a person says a name they have been thinking about for longer than they realized. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. The rain came down on the roof, and the tarpaulin held, and inside the boxes in the corner, Eleanor's things stayed dry. After a moment, Ethan walked past her into the barn and looked at how she'd secured the tarpaulin. He ran a hand along the knots. They were tight. Better than he would have done in those conditions. He didn't say so, but she could see from the set of his shoulders that he knew it. "I'll fix the roof properly this week," he said. "I know you will," she said. He turned. "Thank you. For the boxes." She nodded once and walked back to the house to change her clothes, and did not let herself think about the way he had said her name until she was alone in her room with the door closed. And then she let herself think about it for exactly 30 seconds before she made herself stop. It was getting complicated. She had known somewhere underneath everything that it was going to get complicated. She was not a foolish woman. She did not mistake kindness for something larger than it was. She had not come to Red Creek looking for anything except work, and she had found work, and she had done it well, and the fact that the house had started to feel like something other than a temporary assignment was a problem she had been carefully not examining for the last 3 weeks. She examined it now. Standing in her room in dry clothes with the storm still going outside, she made herself look at it honestly. What she felt when he walked through the door in the evenings. What she felt when he listened to her without interrupting. What she felt when he had stood up in that office and refused to let Gerald Holt reduce her to something small. She had survived a great many things by knowing when to leave before she was asked to. That was the deal she had made with herself years ago, in a country that hadn't wanted her, and then in a new country that only sometimes did. You did not stay until you became a burden. You did not let roots grow too deep. You moved when it was time, and you did not look back, and you did not let yourself need anything so specific that losing it would take something essential with it. And now here she was, standing in a room in a house she had cleaned and repaired and tended, thinking about the way a man had said her name in a barn doorway in a Montana thunderstorm. And she understood with perfect clarity that she was in danger of needing something very specific. She went back downstairs and made supper. Ethan came in from finishing the barn work and washed his hands and sat down, and they ate together the way they had been eating together for 3 weeks. And they talked about the Holbrook situation and the letter Ethan had gotten that afternoon from a lawyer in Helena who was interested in taking the case, and they talked about the storm and the garden and whether the beans had survived the wind. They did not talk about the barn. They did not talk about the boxes. They did not talk about his voice saying her name in a doorway, or about the 30 seconds she'd spent examining what that meant, or about the particular quality of the silence they were sitting in, which was no longer the silence of two people who are strangers sharing a house. It was the silence of two people who are no longer strangers and are not quite ready to say so. The Halbrook case came to a head on the last Friday of June. Caswell showed up at the county recorder's office with a second set of documents, smoother and more legally dressed than the first, and filed a formal challenge to the Halbrook deed. By noon, Tom Halbrook was at Ethan's office, his hat in his hands and his voice barely under control. His wife was with him. She did not cry in the office. She waited until she was outside to do that which Ethan would remember for a long time. He got on his horse and rode to see Caswell directly. He found him at the hotel eating lunch with a kind of deliberate comfort that told Ethan everything he needed to know about how confident Caswell felt. "I've seen your survey amendment," Ethan said, sitting down across from him without being invited. "The discrepancy in the eastern boundary notation." Caswell set down his fork. "These are complex documents, Sheriff. Errors happen in territorial records." "This particular error," Ethan said, "benefits your employer by exactly 60 feet in exactly the location your spur line needs to cross. You want to tell me more about how errors happen?" Something moved behind Caswell's eyes. It was not guilt. Men like Caswell didn't run on guilt. It was calculation. "I'd be careful about making accusations, Sheriff." "I haven't made one," Ethan said. "I've asked a question." He stood. "The lawyer from Helena will be here Monday. Bring your original documentation, all of it, not copies." He picked up his hat. "Every document, because the man coming down from Helena is very good at finding the difference between the two." He left Caswell at his lunch. He rode back through town and past his own house, and he looked at the kitchen window and saw the light on inside and something in him. Something that had been locked up tight for 4 years in the dark turned toward that light the way a plant turns toward a window. He did not stop. He kept writing because he had work to do and because he was Ethan Calloway, and he did not do things impulsively or without understanding them first. But he thought about that light all the way to the south pasture and all the way back. And by the time he came home that evening, he had decided without fully articulating it to himself that whatever was happening in that house and in that kitchen, and between that woman and himself, whatever it was, he was not going to be the one to run away from it. He walked through the front door. Katerina was at the stove. "The lawyer is coming Monday," he said. She turned. "Good." "I told Caswell." "Better?" She handed him a cup of coffee. "How did he take it?" "Like a man who isn't quite as sure of himself as he was this morning," Ethan said. She almost smiled. It was not a full smile. Katerina did not give those out easily, but it was the shape of one at the corners of her mouth, and it was enough. It was more than enough. The lawyer from Helena arrived on Monday morning on the early stage, and his name was Arthur Crane, and he was not what anyone in Red Creek had expected. He was young, younger than Ethan, younger than the problem he'd been hired to solve with a slim build and wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of precise, unhurried manner that either meant he was very good or very inexperienced, and there was no way to tell which until you watched him work. He came into Ethan's office, shook hands, set his bag on the desk, and asked for every document Ethan had in under 2 minutes. He did not make small talk. He did not look around the office or ask about the town. He sat down and started reading. Ethan watched him for a moment and decided he was probably good. Katerina had come with the documents, the originals Ethan had gathered from the Halbrooks, the survey discrepancy she'd identified, and a comparison she'd written out herself, in her careful, deliberate hand, noting the specific difference between the original notation and the amended version Caswell had filed. She set them in front of Crane in the order he would need them without being asked. Crane looked at the comparison sheet. He looked at her. "You prepared this?" "Yes," she said. "Are you a lawyer?" "No." He looked back at the document. "You should have been," he said, and went back to reading. Ethan glanced at Katerina. She was looking at the table, but her jaw had shifted slightly, the particular movement of a person receiving a compliment. They are not allowing themselves to feel too much of, because allowing it feels dangerous. Crane worked for 3 hours straight. When he finally looked up, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose and said, "The amended survey is fraudulent. I can prove it. It's going to take until at least Wednesday to file the correct challenge, and Caswell's employer is going to push back, but the original deed is solid." He put his glasses back on. Who was the territorial recorder when the original was filed? Man named George Pearson, Ethan said. He's dead. Of course he is. Crane picked up his pen. Who witnessed the filing? I'd need to check. Check today. I need 2 names. He looked at Katerina's comparison sheet again. This notation discrepancy, do you know when it appeared? Which filing? The Second Amendment, Katerina said, dated March of this year. The First Amendment from 1881 is clean. Crane wrote something down. So someone altered the survey between 1881 and March of this year specifically. Yes, she said. And that specific alteration only benefits one party. Crane looked at Ethan. She found this. She found it, Ethan confirmed. Crane nodded slowly. Keep her close to this case, he said. I mean that. After Crane left to get settled at the hotel, Ethan walked Katerina back to the house. They went in silence for half a block before she said, He is going to win this. I think so, Ethan agreed. The Halbrooks should know tonight. They have been living in fear for 2 months. She looked at him sideways. Will you go to them? After supper, he said. Then go before supper, she said. They have been afraid long enough. He went before supper. He rode out to the Halbrook place and found Tom in the yard, and his wife Mary on the porch, and he told them what Crane had found, and he watched 2 people remember how to breathe. Mary Halbrook sat down on the porch step with her hand over her mouth, and didn't say a word for a full minute. Tom Halbrook shook Ethan's hand and then couldn't let go of it, just kept shaking it, and finally, Ethan put his other hand on Tom's shoulder and held on until the man steadied. He rode back into town in the last of the evening light and thought about what it means to be the person who gets to tell people that the thing they feared most might not happen after all. He thought that was the best part of the badge. He had not thought about the best part of the badge in a long time. Katerina had kept supper warm. She put it on the table when she heard him come in and sat down across from him and asked, How were they relieved, he said. Scared still, but relieved. Good. She passed him the bread. Fear and relief can live together. It is better than fear alone. He looked at her. Is that from experience? She met his eyes. Most things I know are from experience, she said. He wanted to ask which experience. He didn't. There were things Katerina carried that she had not yet chosen to put on the table, and he was not a man who forced open doors that weren't ready to open. He understood better than most that some histories need time before they can be spoken. But he was running out of summer. That understanding had been sitting at the back of his mind for weeks, and on this particular evening, fed by the relief on Tom Halbrook's face and the sound of Katerina's voice saying fear and relief can live together, it moved to the front. The arrangement had been summer only. She had said it herself. He had said it in the letter. No promises, no expectations. And summer in Montana does not last. The following morning, Caswell came to Ethan's office. He came alone, which was either confident or foolish, and he sat down across from Ethan's desk with the careful ease of a man who has decided that his best remaining move is to appear unconcerned. I understand you've brought in a lawyer, he said. I have, Ethan said. That's your right. Caswell adjusted his cuffs. I want you to understand, Sheriff, that my employer has no interest in making enemies in this county. The railroad is going to bring prosperity to Red Creek. Jobs, commerce, growth. The railroad can bring whatever it wants, Ethan said. On land it is legally acquired. Caswell's expression didn't change. The Halbrook deed has irregularities. The Halbrook deed is valid, Ethan said. The irregularities are in your amendment. I think you know that. A pause, small and tight. These are complex legal matters. I know what the notation means, Mr. Caswell. Ethan leaned forward slightly. And so do you. Caswell looked at him for a long moment. Then something shifted behind his eyes, not quite retreat, but a recalculation. The woman in your household, he said, changing direction with a smoothness that made Ethan's jaw tighten. She's been involved in this case. Miss Novak identified the discrepancy in your amended survey, Ethan said evenly. A foreign housekeeper, Caswell said, looking through legal documents. He smiled, and the smile was the wrong kind. That seems unusual. One might ask what her interest is, whether someone is using her, or whether she's using the position she's found herself in for purposes other than. Ethan stood up. He did it the same way he'd done it with Holt, slowly, deliberately giving the movement its full weight. You're going to want to stop that sentence, he said. Caswell stopped it. Miss Novak is a woman of exceptional intelligence and integrity, Ethan said. She identified fraud that your employer committed against a family that has worked that land for 20 years. If you want to discuss her character, do it somewhere I'm not, because in this office what you just implied is not something I'm willing to hear. He picked up the folder on his desk. We're done here. Your documentation is due to Mr. Crane by Wednesday morning. If it isn't there, I will be riding out to your employer's office myself. Caswell left. Ethan sat back down and put both hands flat on the desk and breathed. He was angry, a specific controlled anger, the kind he knew how to use, rather than be used by. But underneath the anger was something else, something that had been building in him since the conversation took the turn it took. Something about hearing Katerina's name in Caswell's mouth in that way with that implication. Something that had clarified something for him. He walked home at noon. Katerina was in the kitchen garden. He stood at the back fence and watched her for a moment. Caswell came in this morning, he said. She looked up. And he tried to question your involvement in the case, your character. She straightened up and looked at him directly. What did you say? I told him the truth, Ethan said, and I told him to leave. She studied him for a moment. Thank you. I'm going to keep saying it, he said. Every time it's necessary. He held her gaze. It's going to keep being necessary. She looked at him with the complicated, careful expression she wore when something had moved inside her that she was not ready to show, and then she looked back down at the garden. The tomatoes are coming in, she said. Another week, maybe less. He recognized the change of subject for what it was. He let her have it. But he stayed at the fence for another moment before he went back inside, and he thought about what Arthur Crane had said. Keep her close to this case. He intended to. He intended, if he was honest with himself, to keep her close to considerably more than the case. The letter arrived on a Thursday. It came in the afternoon post addressed to Katerina Novak in care of the sheriff's office in handwriting that was clearly related to hers, but less controlled the handwriting of someone writing in distress or in haste. Ethan brought it home that evening and handed it to her at the kitchen table. He saw something cross her face when she looked at the return address. Something she did not have time to hide. It is from my sister, she said. Take your time with it, he said, and left her alone. He went out to the porch and sat in the evening and listened to the quiet and tried not to think about what a letter from a sister written in that kind of handwriting might contain. He failed at not thinking about it. He sat there for a long time. When she came out, she sat down in the other chair and held the letter in both hands and did not speak immediately. Ethan waited. The crickets were loud tonight, and somewhere down the street a child was calling for a dog that wasn't coming. Helena is sick, Katerina said finally. Her voice was flat and careful, in the particular way of a person controlling something large. Seriously sick. She has been trying to manage it on her own, but she cannot manage it alone anymore. She looked out at the dark hills. She is asking me to come to St. Louis. He heard what she said. He heard the part underneath it too. Permanently. He did not say that word. He let her hold the letter and the evening and the weight of it. How serious? He asked. Serious enough that she wrote this letter, Katerina said. Helena does not ask for help. She never has. We are the same that way. She turned the envelope over in her hands. She says she has no one else. Our parents are gone. There are cousins in Poland, but they are far, and there is no money for that kind of distance. She stopped. She's your family, he said quietly. She is my only family. Katerina's voice was very controlled. She is my younger sister. She is 31 years old. I taught her to braid her hair. I taught her 20 words of English before she crossed the ocean. Her hands tightened on the letter. She is asking me to come, and I do not know how not to go. Ethan looked at her profile in the dark. He had known her for 6 weeks. He understood with the clarity that sometimes comes only when something is at risk of being lost, that he had spent 4 years not knowing what he was missing and 6 weeks discovering it, and was now sitting in the dark, being asked to prepare for losing it. He did not say any of that. "When does she need you?" he asked. "The letter was written 3 weeks ago." She looked at the postmark. "She needed me 3 weeks ago." The silence between them had a new weight to it. Not the comfortable silence they had built over 6 weeks of evenings and dinners and shared work. This was the silence of a crossroads, and both of them knew it, and neither of them was ready to speak its name. "I need to think," she said. "I know," he said. She went inside. He stayed on the porch until the last of the dark settled in, and the lights in the house went out one by one. The next morning he was already at the office when a wagon rolled into Red Creek carrying a man he had not expected to see, and had no particular desire to see, which was a railroad developer out of Chicago named Vincent Aldridge. No relation to June, who was Caswell's employer, and who had apparently decided that if his agent could not resolve the Halbrook situation, he would come himself. He was a large man, well-dressed, with the kind of physical confidence that comes from having had money long enough to mistake it for a personal quality. He came into Ethan's office without knocking and sat down without being invited and looked around the room with the particular assessment of a man pricing everything in sight. "Sheriff Calloway," he said, "I think it's time we spoke directly." "My door was open," Ethan said. Aldridge smiled. It was a good smile, the kind that had probably worked on a great many people. "I want to resolve this Halbrook matter. Peacefully. I'm prepared to make the family a very fair offer for the land considerably above market value. They would come out of this better than they went in." "They came in with their land," Ethan said. "They'd like to leave with it." "That's a sentimental position." "It's a legal one," Ethan said. "Their deed is valid. Your survey amendment is fraudulent. Mr. Crane will prove that in court by Friday." Aldridge's smile held, but something behind it shifted. "I hope you understand the economic reality here, Sheriff. The railroad comes through this county, everyone benefits. If the railroad goes another direction, then it goes another direction," Ethan said. Aldridge stood up. He was the kind of man who used height as punctuation. "I understand you have a woman living in your household," he said, pivoting again the same way Caswell had, which told Ethan that this was a prepared strategy. "A foreign woman, a Polish immigrant, who has been involved in legal proceedings she has no standing to be involved in. I'd be careful, Sheriff. It would be easy for people to get the wrong idea about what's going on in your house." The room went very still. The door behind Aldridge opened. Katerina walked in. She had come to bring Ethan the morning coffee she sometimes left at the office when she was passing by with errands. She stopped inside the door, read the room in 1 second, and looked at Aldridge with a face that was composed and direct, and entirely without apology. Aldridge turned. He looked at her the way he'd looked at everything in the room, pricing it, dismissing it. "Ah," he said. "The housekeeper." "My name is Katerina Novak," she said clearly. "Yes." He looked her over. "I'm curious, Miss Novak. Do you understand the legal proceedings you've been inserting yourself into? Do you understand what your role here actually is?" "I understand it better than you'd like me to," she said. Aldridge's eyes narrowed. "You're an immigrant woman, employed as domestic help, who has been meddling in a legal case that concerns a family who has worked their land for 20 years, Katerina said, and her voice was level and cold and absolutely clear, while you have been attempting to steal it from them using fraudulent documents. I identified the specific notation discrepancy in your amended survey. Mr. Crane will present that evidence on Friday. And you came here today not to resolve anything, but to intimidate the sheriff and imply that his association with a foreign woman is a vulnerability you can exploit. She looked at him without flinching. I have been looked down at by better men than you, Mr. Aldridge. It has never yet stopped me from doing what is right. The office was very quiet. Ethan stood up. He stood up and he walked around his desk, and he stood beside Katerina, close enough that there was no ambiguity about the statement being made. He looked at Vincent Aldridge, and he said in the quiet, absolute voice that Red Creek had learned over 11 years, meant the conversation was finished. Miss Novak speaks for herself, and she has done so. You have your answer about the Halbrook case, and you have had mine. I'm going to ask you to leave my office now. Aldridge looked at them both. He was calculating. You could see it. He was calculating what this looked like, what it meant, whether there was still an angle. He found nothing he could use. He picked up his hat and he left. The door closed behind him. The office was silent. Katerina set the coffee down on Ethan's desk with hands that were entirely steady, and Ethan looked at her profile and saw what the steadiness was costing her, and did not comment on it because she would not want him to. He'll go to the town council, she said. Probably. Ethan agreed. He'll say things about me, about us, about this. She gestured at the space between them. Whatever this looks like to people who want to see something wrong in it. He will, Ethan said. She looked at him. And you're not concerned. He held her gaze. I am concerned about the Halbrooks. I'm concerned about your sister. He paused. I am not concerned about Vincent Aldridge's opinion of what happens in my house or in my life. She looked at him for a long moment, with those dark, direct eyes that had been reading him since the first Sunday she walked through his office door. Reading something in him now that she had been careful not to read too directly. Ethan, she said, and it was the first time she had used his given name. She said it the way he had said hers in the barn doorway without planning to. I know, he said. I have not decided about Helena. I know that too. She picked up her basket from the floor where she'd set it down. She walked to the door and put her hand on the frame and stopped. The council meeting is tonight, she said. Aldridge will be there. I know. Will you go? He looked at her. Will you come with me? She turned. She looked at him with the expression she wore when something he said landed somewhere she hadn't expected it to. Then she said, yes. And she walked out into the morning. Ethan sat back down at his desk. He put his hand around the coffee cup she had brought him, and it was still hot, and he looked at the closed door and understood with the clarity of a man who has been running from something long enough to finally recognize the direction he's been running. That whatever happened at the council meeting tonight, whatever happened with Helena's letter, whatever happened at the end of summer when the original arrangement expired, he was done pretending he didn't know what Katerina Novak had become to him. He was just not yet sure what he was going to do about it. The council meeting started at 7. By 6:45, every seat was taken. Every seat in the council hall was taken, and people were standing 3 deep along the back wall when Ethan walked in with Katerina beside him. He had not planned it as a statement. He had simply walked from the house to the hall the way he walked everywhere, and she had walked with him, and the moment they came through the door together, the room knew what it was looking at and made its own determination. Some people looked away. Some looked too long. June Aldridge, sitting in the 3rd row with her husband, caught Katerina's eye and gave her a single nod that meant more than most speeches. Ethan took a seat near the front. Katerina sat beside him. She set her hands in her lap and looked straight ahead and did not perform composure. She simply had it the way a woman has a thing she has spent years earning. Vincent Aldridge was already at the front of the room. He had dressed for the occasion, which told Ethan he had prepared for the occasion, which told Ethan he had planned this more carefully than a man who simply wanted to resolve a land dispute. He had brought 2 men with him who were not from Red Creek, both of them carrying the particular stillness of men employed to look significant. Council Chairman Robert Hale called the meeting to order and ran through the ordinary business with the efficiency of a man who knew the ordinary business was not why the room was full. Then he looked at Aldridge. "Mr. Aldridge, you've requested the floor." Aldridge stood. He was good at this, the standing the presence, the particular way he filled a room with the assumption that the room was glad to have him. "Thank you, Chairman Hale. I want to speak to the people of Red Creek directly about the opportunity in front of this county." He talked for several minutes about the railroad, about commerce, about growth and jobs, and the future of Montana. He talked about it the way a man talks about something he's already decided, which is without questions and without pauses where answers might go. Then he shifted. "I also want to address some concerns about the conduct of this land matter," he said, and his voice changed slightly, still smooth, but with something underneath it now. "Specifically, I want to ask this council and this community whether it is appropriate for the resolution of a legal dispute affecting this county to be influenced by an individual who has no legal standing in this matter, a foreign national, a domestic employee." He let the pause sit exactly long enough. Living in the home of the man with jurisdictional authority over this case. The room moved. Not loudly, more like a held breath shifting from one side to the other. Ethan felt Katerina go very still beside him. Not tense. Still. The particular stillness of a woman who has heard this before in different rooms and different towns, and who has learned that stillness is more powerful than reaction. Hale cleared his throat. "Mr. Aldridge, if you have a specific legal objection to the proceedings—" "I'm not raising a legal objection," Aldridge said smoothly. "I'm raising a community concern about propriety, about the image of this town, about whether the people of Red Creek are comfortable with the situation in the sheriff's household and that situation's influence on county business." He looked out at the room. "I simply think these questions deserve honest discussion." 3 seconds of silence. Then Thomas Birch from the feed store said from the middle of the room, "Well, I'll be honest, I've had some of those same questions." 2 people nodded. 4 did not. Ethan stood up. He did it without rushing. He stood and he turned slightly so he was addressing the room rather than the council table, the way he'd learned to do over 11 years of being the man Red Creek looked to when it needed to understand what was happening. The room went quiet, the way rooms go quiet for him, not out of fear, but out of a kind of instinctive trust that had been built through a decade of showing up, of doing the job, of being exactly what he said he was. "I want to respond to what Mr. Aldridge has said," he said. "And I'm going to do it plainly because that's the only way I know how to speak to this room." He looked at Aldridge first, then at the council, then at the people behind him. "Miss Katerina Novak came to Red Creek at the beginning of June to work in my household. She has done that work with more skill and more integrity than anyone I have known in 11 years of living in this town." His voice was even and quiet and absolutely without apology. "She identified a fraudulent document in a case that affects a family that has been part of this county for 20 years. She did not meddle. She did not interfere. She saw something wrong and she brought it forward because that is the kind of person she is." He paused. "Mr. Aldridge is not here tonight because he wants to discuss propriety. He is here because a woman he dismissed as irrelevant turned out to be the person who found the proof of what his company did. And that has made him uncomfortable. And so he is attempting to make this community uncomfortable with her instead." The room was very quiet. "I will tell you what I know about Miss Novak," Ethan said. "She is honest. She is capable. She is the hardest working person I have encountered in a long time. She has been treated with condescension and suspicion by people in this town from the day she arrived, and she has responded to every single instance of it by working harder and complaining to no one." He looked out at the faces. "That is not the character of a woman who should be questioned. That is the character of a woman who should be respected." He did not look at Katerina while he said it. He looked at the town. He said what he said to the town because the town was who needed to hear it. Then he sat down. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then June Aldridge stood up from the 3rd row. "I'd like to second everything the sheriff just said," she announced. And add that she fixed my back fence post last Tuesday when she saw it was going and didn't ask for anything in return. And if that's the kind of character we're questioning in this town, then I think we've lost our minds." 2 people laughed. 3 more stood up. By the time Robert Hale moved, the discussion along the room had shifted in the particular way rooms shift when they've made up their collective mind about something and are ready to move on. Aldridge sat back down. He was not finished. Men like Aldridge were never finished, but he was diminished, and the room could feel the difference. Katerina did not look at Ethan the whole time he was speaking. She looked at her hands in her lap. When he sat back down beside her, she kept looking at her hands for another moment. Then she said very quietly, so only he could hear, "You did not have to say all of that." "Yes, I did," he said just as quietly. "You said things tonight that the town will not forget." "Good," he said. "I meant all of them." She looked at him then, really looked in the way she had been careful not to look for weeks. "Ethan." "Not here," he said gently. "Later." She looked back at the front of the room. Her jaw was doing the thing it did when she was holding something that needed to be held carefully. He recognized it. He had been watching her face for 2 months, and he recognized every version of what she kept there. Arthur Crane stood up next and presented the case clearly and without theater. The original deed, the survey discrepancy, the timeline of the fraudulent amendment, and the specific legal grounds on which the Halbrook claim would be upheld. He was precise and thorough, and devastating in the way that quiet competence is devastating to people who rely on confusion as a strategy. By the time he finished, even Thomas Birch had stopped nodding at Aldridge's table. The council voted at 9 o'clock. 4-1 in favor of formally supporting the Halbrook deed and requesting the county recorder restore the original survey. The one dissenting vote was a man named Peters, who owned land adjacent to the proposed spur line, and had his own reasons, which everyone in the room understood, and no one said out loud. Aldridge left without speaking to anyone. His 2 silent companions followed him out. The room exhaled. Tom Halbrook crossed the room and shook Ethan's hand, and then turned to Katerina and took her hand in both of his and held it. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was unsteady. "What you found in those documents." He stopped. Tried again. "Mary and I, we don't have words for it." "You don't need words," Katerina said. "Keep your land. That is enough." He nodded. He couldn't say anything else. He went back to his wife. On the walk home, they did not speak for the first block. The night was warm and still, and the stars were doing what Montana stars do, which is to present themselves in a quantity that makes argument feel small. Then Katerina said, "You told the town you respect me." "I told the town the truth," he said. "You told them more than that." She walked with her hands clasped in front of her the way she walked when she was working through something. "You stood up in front of everyone, and you didn't just defend my work. You defended me." She paused. "As a person, not as an employee." "You are a person," he said. "First, the employment is a detail." She stopped walking. He took 2 more steps before he realized it and turned back. She was standing on the dark street, looking at him with the expression he had never quite seen on her before, because it was the expression she had been keeping the most carefully guarded of all. It was not composed. It was not careful. It was Katerina, without the armor, and the woman underneath it looked at him like someone who has been surviving for so long that she has forgotten what it feels like to be seen. "I am going to write to Helena tonight," she said. His chest tightened. "Okay," he said. "I need to know how serious her illness is. I need to understand what she actually needs before I can—" She stopped. "Before I can make any decision." "That's sensible," he said. His voice was steady. He was very focused on keeping his voice steady. "I have been trying to be sensible about everything for 2 months," she said. "It is becoming difficult." He looked at her. "What's making it difficult?" She looked back at him with those direct dark eyes. "You know what is making it difficult," she said. He took a step back toward her. "Say it anyway." She was quiet for a moment. The night was very still. "I did not come here to feel anything," she said. I came here to work, for the summer. That was the arrangement. Her voice was honest in the way her voice was always honest, without drama, without performance. And somewhere between the barn roof and the council hall, it stopped being only that. I know, he said. That is a problem, she said, because Helena is real, and sick, and my sister. Her jaw tightened. And I do not know how to choose between... She stopped herself. Between what? He asked. She looked at him and didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. He took the last step back to where she was standing. He did not touch her. He stood in front of her in the dark street and looked at her directly and said what he had been moving toward for 2 months. I don't want you to leave at the end of summer. The words sat in the air between them. Ethan, I know what the arrangement was, he said. I know what you came here for, and I know what Helena's letter means, and I know that you have never depended on anyone for anything, and I am not asking you to start now. He held her gaze. I'm telling you something true. What you do with it is yours to decide. But I'm done not saying it. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face, not one thing. Many things moving through in quick succession, the way weather moves across Montana hills. I have left everywhere I have ever lived, she said. I have left before people could tell me to go. That is how I have survived. I know, he said. You've been leaving before the end since before you got here. She blinked. It was the truest thing he'd said, and they both knew it. Yes, she said very quietly. I have. You don't have to do that here, he said. She looked down at the street. She was doing what she did when something had gone past the edge of what she could hold in the careful, controlled way. She held things. She was going quiet and internal, and he could almost watch her processing it, working through it the way she worked through everything methodically without shortcuts. Let me write to Helena, she said finally. Write to Helena, he agreed. And then, she looked up at him. Then we will talk. Properly. Properly, he said. She walked the rest of the way home in silence, and he walked beside her, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have finally said the thing that needed saying, and are giving it room to breathe. She wrote the letter that night. He heard the scratch of her pen from the other side of the kitchen wall, while he sat in the front room pretending to read, and not reading a single word. She wrote for a long time. When she finished, she set the letter on the table to be posted in the morning, and went to bed. And Ethan sat in the front room in the quiet and tried to remember the last time anything had mattered to him this much, and found he had to go back further than 4 years to find it. The response from Helena came 11 days later. 11 days, during which the Halbrook case was formally settled in the family's favor, during which Arthur Crane packed his bag and shook Ethan's hand and told Katerina again that she should have been a lawyer, during which Red Creek went back to being Red Creek, with the particular relief of a small town that has navigated something large and come out the other side intact. 11 days during which Ethan and Katerina lived in the house together with the careful, charged awareness of two people who have spoken honestly and are now waiting to see what honesty costs. They had dinner every evening. They sat on the porch. They talked about ordinary things, the garden, the town, the weather, a dispute over a water trough on the north end of Main Street that Ethan was mediating. They did not talk about what had been said on the dark street outside the council hall, because it had been said, and saying it again would not add anything, and they were both people who understood that some things need time more than they need repetition. But the awareness was there, in the way he handed her coffee in the morning, in the way she turned when he came through the door, not performing the turn, just doing it, turning toward him, the way a person turns toward something they've decided matters. In the way the silence between them had changed texture entirely, from the silence of strangers to the silence of something that had no word for itself yet, but was clearly moving toward one. Helena's letter arrived on a Wednesday. Katerina read it at the kitchen table while Ethan was still at the office. When he came home that evening, she was sitting in the chair by the window with the letter in her hand and an expression on her face that he could not immediately read. "Tell me," he said, sitting down across from her. "Helena has been seen by 2 doctors in St. Louis," she said. They believe she will recover. It will take time, several months, possibly longer, but she is not. She stopped. She is not dying. That's good news, he said carefully. Yes. Katerina looked at the letter. She writes that she has a neighbor, a woman her age, who has been helping her. A good woman. She writes. She paused, reading, I asked you to come because I was frightened, and I did not want to face it alone. But I think I was also frightened for you, Katerina. You have been alone for so long. I do not want that for you anymore. Stay where you are, if where you are is good. Tell me it is good. Ethan was very still. Katerina folded the letter. She held it in her hands and looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him. She is telling me to stay, she said. What are you telling you? He asked. She looked at him with the expression she'd worn on the dark street open. Unguarded, the face of a woman who has decided that the armor has cost her enough. I am telling myself, she said slowly, that I have been afraid for a very long time, that I have been leaving places before they could become home because I did not believe I was allowed to have a home. She set the letter down on the table. And I am telling myself that this house, her voice was quiet and very honest, has felt like home since the 3rd week of June. Ethan leaned forward. Then stay, he said. She looked at him. It is not that simple. Tell me what makes it complicated, he said. Specifically, one thing at a time. I'll stay here all night if that's what it takes. She almost smiled. It was closer to a full smile than usual. One thing at a time, she repeated. One thing at a time, he said. She took a breath. I am afraid, she said, that if I stay, and if this... She gestured at the space between them, at the kitchen, at the house, at everything. If this becomes what it feels like it is becoming, and then something goes wrong, I will not be able to leave it the way I have left other places. I will not be able to walk away intact. He looked at her for a long time. That's because this isn't like other places, he said finally. And you know that. Yes, she said. That is exactly what frightens me. He stood up. He crossed to where she was sitting, and he crouched down so they were eye level, and he looked at her directly with the steadiness that Red Creek had trusted for 11 years. And he said, Katerina, I buried my wife 4 years ago, and I stopped living. I kept the badge, and I kept the house, and I kept doing everything a living man does except actually living any of it. And then you walked through my office door with one suitcase, and fixed my back door, and made me sit down for dinner, and I started coming home before dark. He paused. I am not a man who says things he doesn't mean. So I am going to say this once, and I need you to hear it. He held her gaze. I don't want a housekeeper. I haven't wanted a housekeeper since approximately the 3rd week of June. I want you. I want whatever this is. And I will not ask you to stay for the summer, or stay for convenience, or stay because it makes sense. I am asking you to stay because I love you, and I think you already know that. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the evening was going down gold behind the hills. Katerina looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were bright in a way they had not been before, or perhaps had been before, and he had only now allowed himself to see it. You are making this very difficult to be sensible about, she said. Good, he said. I've been sensible for 4 years. It's a terrible way to live. She put her hand against his face, just her palm against his jaw, the way a person touches something they have been careful not to touch until they were certain. I love you too, she said. I have been trying not to for approximately 6 weeks. He covered her hand with his. How's that been going? Badly, she said, and she laughed a real laugh, unguarded and warm, and completely unlike the careful, almost smiles she had been giving him all summer. It filled the kitchen the way the bread smell filled it, and the coffee smell filled it, and all the small domestic evidences of her presence filled it, and Ethan Calloway, who had not heard laughter in that kitchen in 4 years, thought that it was the best sound he had ever heard in his life. He proposed on a Thursday morning, not on one knee in the parlor with flowers and rehearsed words. That was not who Ethan Calloway was, and Katerina would not have believed it if it had been. He proposed in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, while she was making coffee, and he was pulling on his boot. And it came out of him the way true things come out of people who have been holding them long enough without ceremony, without preamble, without any of the staging that makes a moment feel performed rather than real. "Marry me," he said. She turned from the stove. She looked at him with his boot half on, and his hair not yet combed, and the morning light coming through the kitchen window at the particular angle it came through at that hour, and she said without missing a beat, "You have not finished putting on your boot." "I know," he said. "Marry me anyway." She looked at him for 3 full seconds. "Yes," she said, and turned back to the coffee. He sat there for a moment with his boot still half on. Then he finished pulling it on, stood up, walked to where she was standing, and kissed her once carefully on the side of her head. She did not turn around, but her shoulders changed the particular release of a person who has been holding something for a long time and has finally been given permission to set it down. They told Margaret first. Margaret cried in the way that women who pride themselves on practicality cry, which is quickly, and then with immediate denial. She pulled Katerina into her arms and held her and said into her hair, "I wrote that notice, you know. I wrote it because he was disappearing, and I didn't know how else to stop it." She pulled back and looked at her. "I had no idea I was writing it for you." "Neither did I," Katerina said. June Aldridge brought a pie to the house that same afternoon, which in Red Creek was the community equivalent of a formal blessing. She set it on the kitchen table and looked at Ethan and said, "It's about time," and looked at Katerina and said, "You are the best thing that has happened to this man in years, and I want you to know that everyone with sense in this town has known it since the 2nd week of June." Then she picked up her basket and left before either of them could respond. Thomas Birch at the feed store was notably quiet on the subject. He said congratulations when Ethan came in for nails, and said it with the stiff correctness of a man who has been on the wrong side of a situation and knows it and has not quite decided what to do about that knowledge. Ethan shook his hand. He did not make it easier or harder than that. The wedding was set for the 2nd Saturday of July. It was not a large wedding. Katerina did not want large. She had said so plainly. "I do not want a performance. I want a thing that is real." And Ethan had agreed with the relief of a man who had been dreading the alternative. They arranged for the ceremony under the big cottonwood at the east edge of town, the one that stood at the top of the rise where you could see the whole valley, and they kept the guest list to the people who had earned their place in the story. The Halbrooks came. Tom Halbrook pressed Katerina's hand before the ceremony and said simply, "Thank you for seeing what you saw." And she said, "Thank you for fighting for what was yours." And that was the whole of it. Arthur Crane sent a letter from Helena that arrived 2 days before the wedding. It was formal and warm in equal measure, and ended with the sentence, "I have seen a great many legal proceedings and a considerable number of people, and I have rarely encountered the combination of mind and character that I found in your household. I wish you both everything good." Katerina read it at the kitchen table, and then set it down carefully and said nothing for a moment. Ethan watched her. "Good letter," he said. "He called me a combination of mind and character," she said. "He was right," Ethan said. She looked up. "You are going to make me cry before the wedding, and I would prefer not to." "Then stop reading compliments," he said. "They are unexpected," she said. "I am not used to them." "You're going to have to get used to them," he said. "I intend to keep saying true things to you for a long time." She looked at him across the kitchen table in the house she had cleaned and repaired and planted, and made into something that bore no resemblance to the hollow, echoing place it had been before June. And something in her face did the thing it had been doing more frequently in recent weeks. It opened. The careful armored face she had worn through 9 years of surviving in a country that made her work twice as hard. For half as much, just went soft. Just for a moment, in the particular way it went soft, only for him. "A long time," she repeated. "A very long time," he confirmed. The morning of the wedding, Hetty Graves came to the house. Katerina opened the door and found her standing on the step with a small wrapped package and an expression that was doing complicated things. Hetty Graves, who had been talking about Katerina with varying degrees of concern and suspicion since the first week of June, who had implied things at sewing circles and raised eyebrows at town gatherings and been part of the particular low-grade resistance that some people in Red Creek had maintained toward the Polish woman in the sheriff's house. She stood on the step and she said, "I brought you something for the wedding." Katerina looked at her. She did not perform warmth, she didn't feel, because she was not that kind of woman. But she was also not the kind of woman who rejected something offered honestly regardless of its source. "Thank you," she said. "Would you like to come in?" Hetty came in. She sat at the kitchen table and set the package down and folded her hands on top of it. "I want to say something," she said. "And I want to say it before the wedding so it doesn't seem like I only mean it because everything went well." Katerina sat down across from her and waited. "I was not kind to you," Hetty said. "I didn't say anything directly unkind. I want to be clear about that, but I talked about you. In ways that weren't fair. And I was suspicious of you because of where you came from, and because I didn't understand what you were doing here. And I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I've come to the conclusion that my suspicion was about me, and not about you, and I'm sorry for it." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Then Katerina said, "Thank you for saying that." "You don't have to forgive me," Hetty said. "I know I don't have to," Katerina said. "But I do, because I have lived long enough to know that suspicion of the unfamiliar is not the same as cruelty, and I have seen the difference, and you are not cruel." She looked at Hetty evenly. "We will start from today." Hetty opened the package. Inside was a small embroidered handkerchief, the kind made by hand with a delicacy of needlework that told you it had cost someone significant time. "I made it," Hetty said. "I'm good with a needle. I thought something handmade seemed right." Katerina looked at it for a long moment. She picked it up carefully. "It is beautiful," she said. And she meant it. And Hetty left with the stiff, relieved posture of a woman who has done something difficult and found it less impossible than she'd feared. Katerina stood at the kitchen window and watched her go and thought about what it means to be received into a place, not just tolerated in it, not just endured, but actually received. She had not known, when she stepped off the stage in Red Creek in June with one suitcase and a letter offering her a summer's work, that this was what she was walking toward. She had not let herself imagine it. She had learned through years of practice not to imagine things she wasn't sure she was allowed to have. She was allowing herself to imagine it now. The ceremony was at 4 in the afternoon, under the cottonwood with the valley below them, and the sky doing what Montana skies do in July, which is to be enormous and blue, and entirely without apology. Robert Hale performed it because Red Creek's minister had broken his leg the week before, and Robert Hale had done this 3 times already and knew the words. He was brief, and he was sincere, which was everything that was required. When he got to the part where Ethan was asked to speak his vows, Ethan looked at Katerina and said what he had prepared, which was not the standard language, because Ethan Calloway had never once in his life said something because it was expected rather than because it was true. He said, "I spent 4 years in a house that was only a building. You made it a home. I don't have words bigger than that, so I'll just say, I see you. All of you. The parts you're careful with, and the parts you keep quiet. I see them, and I want them, and I am asking you to let me keep seeing them for the rest of my life." Katerina stood in front of him, under the cottonwood tree, with the valley behind her, and the people they had both earned around them, and she said in her careful, honest voice, "I came here not expecting to stay. I came here not expecting anything except work and fair wages, and a clean place to sleep. What I found was the first man who looked at me and saw a person rather than a category, and the first place in 9 years that felt like mine." She paused. "I will stay," she said. "Not because I have nowhere else to go, because there is nowhere else I want to be." June Aldridge cried. Tom Halbrook looked at his wife, and his wife looked back at him, and they held hands without speaking. Margaret Dawson did not cry this time, because she had already used up her crying 2 weeks ago and had decided she was done with it, and she stood with her hands clasped and her chin up, and the expression of a woman who has gotten exactly the outcome she was hoping for, and is choosing to accept credit for it gracefully. At the back of the gathering, Thomas Birch stood with his hat in his hands. He had not been invited, but he had come anyway, which was its own kind of apology, and Ethan had seen him arrive and nodded once, which was its own kind of acceptance. After the ceremony, they walked back to the house together. Not with a crowd, the gathering moved to Margaret's store, which she'd offered for the celebration. But Ethan and Katerina walked the first block alone, and he offered his arm, and she took it, and they walked in the warm July evening, in the particular silence that follows something that cannot be undone, and that you are glad cannot be undone. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, testing the words. She made a small sound. "That will take some adjusting to," she said. "You have time," he said. "We have time," she corrected. He covered her hand on his arm. "Yes," he said. "We do." Helena came in September. She arrived thinner than Katerina remembered, with shadows under her eyes that had not been there before, and she stood on the platform of the Red Creek station and looked at her sister, and then looked at the man standing beside her sister, and then looked back at her sister again, with an expression that asked a great many questions simultaneously. Katerina walked forward and took her sister's bag out of her hand, and put her arms around her and held on, and Helena held on back, and for a moment, neither of them said anything, because they were sisters, and they had not seen each other in 2 years, and some things do not require words to be understood. Then Helena pulled back and looked at Ethan. He took off his hat. "Mrs. Novak," he said. "I'm glad you're here." "It is Miss Novak," she said, "and I am glad to be here." She looked at him with the assessing look that was slightly more animated than her sister's version of the same look. "You are the sheriff." "I am," he said. "Katerina wrote that you are a good man." "I try to be," he said. "She does not use that phrase lightly," Helena said. "She has met a great many men over the years, and I have never heard her use it before." She picked up her smaller bag and looked at them both. "Well, show me this house I have been hearing about." They walked back through town. Helena between them asking questions about everything, the buildings, the people, the garden, the court case, the council meeting in approximately that order. She asked about the barn roof, and Katerina's trip up the ladder in the storm, and Ethan said, "She was already up and back down before I knew she'd gone." And Helena said yes, that is exactly what she would do, in the fond, exasperated tone of a woman who has known her sister for 31 years. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, and the two sisters sat at the kitchen table with tea, Helena looked around the kitchen the way Katerina had looked at it the very first evening, assessing, taking inventory, understanding what was being communicated by the space. "It is different than I imagined," Helena said. "How did you imagine it?" "I don't know, more temporary." Helena turned her cup in her hands. "This kitchen looks like someone intends to stay." "Someone does," Katerina said. Helena looked at her, really looked the way a younger sister looks at an older sister she has been worried about for a long time and is now reassessing. "You are different," she said. "Am I?" "You are not watching the door," Helena said. "You always watch the door, Katerina. Wherever we have ever been, you have always positioned yourself so you can see the way out." She looked around the kitchen again. "You are not doing that here." Katerina was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "No, I am not." "When did that stop?" "I don't know exactly." She thought about it honestly. "Sometime in June, I think, before I knew it was happening." Helena nodded slowly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I am sorry I asked you to come to St. Louis. I was frightened, and I was selfish, and if you had come—" She stopped. "If I had come, I would not be here," Katerina said simply. "And that would have been a loss I did not understand yet when you wrote the letter." "Are you angry with me for writing it?" "No." Katerina looked at her sister. "You gave me a reason to say out loud that I was choosing to stay. I needed that. I needed to choose it on purpose, not just drift into it. She met Helena's eyes. You gave me that without knowing you were giving it. Helena put her hand over her sister's on the table. Tell me about him, she said. Not what you wrote. Tell me what you haven't written. Katerina looked at her tea. She thought about the barn doorway and her name in his voice. She thought about the dark street outside the council hall and his hands and his voice saying, I love you, in the honest, unglamorous way he said everything. She thought about 6 in the morning and marry me anyway, and the boot that was still half on. He sees me, she said. That is the whole of it. He has always seen me, from the very first day. She looked up. I have spent 9 years being invisible in various ways, and he looked at me on the first Sunday, and he saw a person. Not an immigrant, not a problem, not a convenience. She paused. A person. Helena was quiet. Then she said, Good, in a voice that held everything a younger sister feels when she learns that her older sister is finally safe. Good. The winter came in hard that year. It always did in Montana, and Ethan had warned her, and she had said, I have survived Polish winters. And he had said, that's not the same thing. And she had said, we will see. And they had both been right in different ways. It was brutal and cold, and the wind was unlike anything she had known, and she survived it completely, and even found in it a particular satisfaction, the satisfaction of a woman weathering something difficult inside a house she has made her own. The garden came back in the spring. Better than the first year because she knew the soil now knew its particular stubbornness, and what it needed, and what it would give back if you were patient with it. She put in more this time, another row of bean sweet corn, for the first time a herb garden along the south fence, that by June smelled like something from another world entirely. Ethan came home one evening in May to find her on her knees in the dirt, with her hands working along a bean row exactly as she had been the day Margaret Dawson had stood at the fence and asked about the garden. He stood at the fence and looked at her. She looked up. What? She said. Nothing, he said. I was just thinking about the first time I saw you do that. She sat back on her heels. You watched me then, too. I wasn't sure it was polite to say so, he said. She almost smiled. It wasn't, she said. But you can say so now. He looked at her for a moment with the particular quiet look he had, the look that was not dramatic and not performed, and that meant more than any dramatic performed thing could mean. You are the best thing that happened in this town in 11 years, he said, including me. She looked back at the beans. You are going to make me cry in the garden, she said. You cried in the barn in a thunderstorm, he said. The garden is an improvement. I did not cry in the barn, she said. I fell off the ladder. Twice, he said. It was slippery, she said. He laughed. She did not look up, but her shoulders were doing the thing they did when she was laughing and trying not to show it. He opened the back gate and came in and sat on the garden bench she'd made him build in April, and watched her work in the evening light, and neither of them said anything more because there was nothing more that needed saying. Helena stayed through October. When she left, she was stronger than she had arrived, and she hugged Ethan at the station platform with the genuine warmth of a woman who has decided she trusts a man, which in Helena Novak's case was not a small thing. Take care of her, she said. She takes care of herself, he said. I just make sure she doesn't have to do it alone. Helena pulled back and looked at him. Yes, she said. That is exactly the right answer. She kissed his cheek and picked up her bag. She turned back once at the platform steps. I will come back in the spring, she said. The garden will be better in spring, Katerina said. Everything will be better in spring, Helena said, and stepped onto the train. They stood on the platform and watched the train go, and Katerina put her hand through Ethan's arm, and he covered it with his, and they stood there until the train was small in the distance, and then gone, and the platform was empty except for them. Are you all right? He asked. Yes, she said, and she meant it. She meant it the way she had not been able to mean that word for a very long time completely, without reservation, without the part of the truth she was leaving out. The years that followed were not simple. Nothing true ever is. There were hard winters and a drought in 1886 that tested every farm and ranch in the county, and a dispute over the North Creek water rights that Ethan spent 4 months resolving, and that Katerina helped document in the way she had helped with the Halbrook case systematically and without fanfare. There were arguments between them, real ones, because they were two people with strong characters and honest opinions, and they had learned that the arguments did not mean what she had feared. Arguments meant which was the beginning of the end. They meant that two people were taking each other seriously enough to disagree. There were mornings when he left before she was awake, and evenings when she was already in bed by the time he got home, and days when the town and the badge demanded everything he had, and there was little left by evening, and she learned to read those days and not ask for what he didn't have, and he learned to tell her when he was running empty rather than disappearing into the silence the way he had before she came. They learned each other. That is the whole of it. They learned each other with the patience and attention that two people give to something they have decided is worth understanding completely. Red Creek grew. The railroad came through in 1887 on a route that went nowhere near the Halbrook land, and the town added 2 streets and a proper hotel and a school that Katerina had lobbied the council for with the same methodical persistence she brought to everything she believed in. She taught 2 afternoons a week at that school English and arithmetic, and the children called her Mrs. Calloway, and she had learned after 3 years to answer to it without hesitation. Hetty Graves became, in the particular way that former adversaries sometimes do, one of the people Katerina trusted most in Red Creek. Not because she forgot what had come before, because she respected what came after. Hetty ran the sewing circle, and Katerina attended occasionally, and they did not perform a friendship. They didn't feel they built a real one slowly on the foundation of 2 women who respected honesty more than comfort. Tom and Mary Halbrook named their youngest daughter Katerina. They told her at Sunday dinner in the fall of 1885, and Katerina sat with her fork halfway to her mouth and did not speak for a full 10 seconds. Then she said, "You did not have to do that." "We know we didn't have to," Mary said. "We wanted to." Ethan watched his wife's face do the thing he loved most, open unguarded, the armor completely gone. Nothing between her and the feeling she was having. She set her fork down carefully. "Thank you," she said with all the simplicity and fullness of a person who has been given something they did not know how to ask for and had stopped hoping they would receive. That night, lying awake in the dark in the house she had made into a home, Katerina thought about her mother's garden in Poland, about planting something as evidence that you intend to be there when it is time to harvest. She thought about all the places she had left before harvest, all the things she had planted and walked away from. She was not walking away from this, She put her hand on Ethan's arm in the dark, and he turned toward her without waking fully, the way a person turns toward something they trust even in sleep. And she thought about what it had cost her to get here, and what it had given her, and decided that the accounting was finished, that she was done keeping the ledger, that some things are not about what they cost, they are about what they become. Outside Red Creek was quiet. The house held the dark and the warmth and the breathing of a man who had stopped disappearing and a woman who had stopped leaving, and neither of them alone would have managed it. 2 people who had survived everything separately had finally, stubbornly, improbably chosen to stop surviving alone. And that choice made in a kitchen over half on boots and early coffee, and 2 words that meant everything was the only home either of them had ever needed.